For our Economics 330 group project, my group, consisting of Andrew Park, Jackson Fields, Carly Davis, Nate Allen, and myself, Zach Carasello, chose to analyze the Republic of Armenia. To start off, we're going to understand the basics of Armenia, and that being the demographics. Population-wise, they have a population of 2,971,966. And comparing this to a large city in the United States, we can compare it to Chicago with a population of about 2,671,635. Size-wise, Armenia is relatively small, and it is located in the southwestern portion of Asia. It has a size of 11,484,000 square miles. This size can be compared to putting Maryland and Delaware together. Their GDP per capita, measured in US dollars, is 4,266. And this conversion rate, 1 Armenian dram, is equal to 0.0020 US dollars. Due to their GDP per capita, the World Bank classifies Armenia as an upper to middle income country. They are also a very religious country, as they have the first church built in the world in the early 4th century. They are also the first country in the world to adopt Christianity as its state religion. Geographically, Armenia is landlocked by 4 countries, those being Iran, the Republic of Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey. Their location requires them to have open borders, but this has caused issues with Turkey and Azerbaijan, as the latter country has enacted war with Armenia in the last few years. This is also a problem because Turkey and Azerbaijan are diplomatic allies, and Armenia is left out. Elevation-wise, Armenia has an average elevation of about 5,900 feet, which is a very high average elevation for any region. Armenia is also covered with a variety of mountain ranges that range over 10,000 feet, as well as many rivers, lakes, and volcanic plateaus. Their climate, due to its high elevation and position in the Middle East, they suffer from a wide variation in temperatures and precipitation. The average temperature, however, during the winter is about 30 degrees Fahrenheit and about 80 degrees Fahrenheit during the summer. Northern Armenia is in the temperate climatic zone, while southern Armenia is in the subtropical zone. Now, these averages are not entirely accurate due to these high elevation changes all over the country, so they vary a little bit from north to south. The impact of all this is that due to its landlocked location and wide variation in elevation and temperature, they have to rely on hydroelectric energy domestically, and they are forced to import most all of its fossil fuels. This also impacts Armenia's ranking of per capita income in comparison to its neighboring countries, as Turkey has a per capita income of $33,963, Georgia $16,590, Azerbaijan $15,299, and Armenia $14,701. All of these are measured using PPP adjusted data and international dollars using the exchange rate approach.
It has a lot of minerals and materials such as copper and gold and many other things. This industry for them is over 50% of their exports, and that part of their economy hasn't really fully developed, but it's expected that when it does, it's going to see significant growth in the GDP and exports for Armenia. The historical data for the growth from the years 1996 to projected 2026 of the GDP per capita shows that Armenia has seen a relatively steady increase in their growth, but they've had a few downturns that I'll get to later. One challenge for Armenia is shown in the 1990 snapshot of their GDP, where after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they saw a huge downturn in their GDP because they were part of the Soviet Union, and when it collapsed, they saw high inflation rates, a drop in productivity, and of course, a loss in national income, as well as total GDP and GDP per capita. Now, as we look at the snapshot from 2008 to 2019 for Armenia's GDP, we see that they've also seen steady growth, except for the year 2009, after the 2008 global housing market recession, they saw a huge downturn as well, just like earlier, but also just like earlier, they were able to recover and see steady growth after that as well. Now, as we look at a timeline of Armenia and the conflict with Azerbaijan, we see that it's been over the Nagorno-Karabakh territory, and it's been going on since the late 1980s, whenever they were trying to unify the territory, but neither Armenia or Azerbaijan wanted to do that. And the war, the last event in it was at 2020, whenever there was a conflict from late September to mid-November, and that ended with a ceasefire agreement with Russia, helping them out with that. And if we look at Armenia's development indicators, we see the HDI, the life expectancy, and the expected and mean years of schooling, as well as the GNI per capita. All these development indicators are on average relatively close to other countries that have a similar GDP per capita.
Okay, so now going on to some more characteristics. The Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, which is basically a war, has been going on since 1988. In regards to spending, education is 8.7% of their GDP. Health is 11.34% of their GDP. And infrastructure spending is expected to increase by over 30% compared to 2021, but right now it's pretty low. The expropriation risk is a level of 4, and you can see that that is about mid-range in the different risks. Some more characteristics of development is that trade is 69% of GDP compared to 44% for upper middle income countries. So you can see that trade makes up more percentage of their GDP than countries in the same category as them. They are also a part of the Eurasian Economic Union, and they have free trade agreements with the Commonwealth of Independent States. They also have similar quality of trade and transportation infrastructure compared to upper middle income countries. They also have foreign investment agreements with the US and EU. The business environment is improving, but it's not yet fully developed, and few natural fossil fuels are found in Armenia, but it's located close to Russia, who exports fossil fuels to Armenia. So there are also conflicts with our neighboring country, Azerbaijan, and this has hurt development. Moving on to inequality and poverty. So the income distribution for 2017, you can see that the bottom 20% only made 8.3% of their GDP, while the highest 20% had 42.4% of their wealth. So this is pretty unequal and a not very fair distribution. So their Gini coefficient is 25.2, and their population under the poverty line is 25.2 as well. Reasons for high poverty are lack of jobs, weak agricultural system, immigration to Russia, and high food prices. Poverty trends, there's a steady decrease in poverty after dissolution of the Soviet Union, but poverty did increase during the 2008 recession. From that recession, they are still trying to recover today. Moving on to population growth, the annual population change is 0.13%. The trends in population change from 1950 to 2100. In 1950, there was a 2% population growth, and it is expected to decrease to negative 0.76%. They are in stage 5 of the demographic stage, and their fertility rate is 1.757, which is way below the replacement rate. So talking about the future of population, some population issues include a demographic decline after independence, immigration to Russia for higher paying jobs, and a decreasing share of reproducing age women. So fixing demographic decline, the goal is to increase population by 1/3 in the next 2 decades. The plan of action to achieve this is halting immigration, increasing birth rate and longevity, and creating incentives for immigrants to return. So there have been baby bonuses put on by the government that encourage families to bear more children. So for example, in 2012, the government offered $2,100 US to have 3 to 4 children and $3,130 for 5 or more children. So some issues with this policy is that it's not a big enough incentive to impact family planning decisions. To give you a better idea of why it's not a big enough incentive, it would basically, the money given would only cover diapers for that year. So there is really no incentive to cut back or to increase the amount of children that you have. And then there's also no focus on increasing education for women. Now we're going to move on to section 2 of the presentation and cover issues halting growth in Armenia. So 5 issues that we chose to cover are 1, the history of internal corruption, 2, the severely out of date and minimal infrastructure, 3 is war, 4 is lack of export goods, and 5 is the unskilled labor force. Going further into issue 1, the history of internal corruption, Armenia is ranked 58th in the Corruption Perception Index. This impacts the level of equity in distributing resources. It also reduces productivity of investments, and it deters international investors. Looking at issue 2, which is poor infrastructure, there is restricted access to Armenia. There is a heavy reliance on roads built in the Soviet era. This leads to economic isolation in rural areas, and this also causes an increase in number of low-wage jobs. For issue 3, the prevalence of wars. From 1915 to 1960, there was the Armenian genocide. This was one of the biggest genocides in the history of mankind, and it severely impacted Armenia. There's also the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict with Azerbaijan, which is currently going on now. The prevalence of wars leads to increased inflation, and it leads to the destruction of irrigation systems, causing economic hardship in the agricultural sector. Issue 4 is trade issues. The main exports for Armenia are from the agricultural sector. There's a heavy reliance on imports of goods, which is oil, natural gas, machinery, etc. There are also improper implementations of the customs code, and import costs create inefficiency and deters domestic production. For issue 5, unskilled labor force, there's a lack of safe school spaces, there's a high unemployment rate and low wages, which also deters foreign investment, and there's also the missing role of women in economic activities, including the workforce. We are now going to focus on solving internal corruption. So about the program, there has been a program for countries specifically in the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia who are subject to poor economic governments. The IMF, which is the International Monetary Fund, tackles this issue by supporting MENA countries through policy advice and capacity development to improve governance. They have recently created a new framework on governance in 2018 that has been approved and is known as the Framework for Enhanced Engagement on Governance. It can be broken down into 4 elements. The 4 elements previously stated are 1, the countries in this program are enabled to assess the nature of each country's government. This guides the assessment of the macroeconomic implications of governance vulnerabilities, taking into account the applicable standards for surveillance and the use of fund resources. This provides a framework for policy advice and capacity development, and focused on policies that prevent private actors from offering bribes or providing services that facilitate concealment of corruption proceeds. The effectiveness of the policy has only been recently in effect, so there is not much data surrounding the efficacy of said implementation. However, predictions indicate a future reduction in levels of corruption. So some strengths is that it provides loans to member countries as well as support in implementing economic policies. This can bail out a country in order to keep corruption down and to increase stability. Weaknesses include that this would allow member nations to be bailed out if they were purposefully irresponsible. Many disagree over when and how much money is given out to countries. Solutions. The IMF could place a limit on the amount of money a country can receive in a given amount of time to prevent abuse. So the Foreign Program for Solving Internal Corruption. In the US, the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, has put a focus on stopping corruption domestically and abroad. They partner with businesses and economic leaders, as well as provide support to at-risk sectors to prevent corruption. They are working on helping to implement their anti-corruption strategies to countries with corruption problems. Moving on to the solution. Armenia can help its corruption problem by working more with the IMF to implement successful economic policies. They should also work with programs like the USAID anti-corruption program to help directly fight the ongoing problem. This last slide that we have is our sources cited. So these underlined phrases are the websites and the hyperlinked information you can go find. And the other sources are listed on the slides, either in the bottom corner or through a hyperlink. Thanks for listening.